Now, the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson stepped back into the Brexit debate today, urging the Prime Minister to chuck checkers and try to negotiate what he called a Super Canada free trade deal instead. Writing in the Telegraph, Mr Johnson also accused the government, of which he was a member for quite some time, of a collective failure of government. Mr Johnson's Brexit plan claims it's possible to have no physical border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but checks on goods could be carried out miles inland, zero tariffs and zero quotas on imports and exports between the EU and UK. Instead of following EU rules, there'd be mutual recognition of regulations, use of technology to keep supply chains operating smoothly, no European court, but a dispute settlement mechanism with both sides equal. Well, the former Prime Minister, John Major, who advocates a second referendum these days, has been in the North East today. Kieran Jenkins was also there. Kieran.
Well, John Major is still on stage, in fact, taking part in a Q&A inevitably dominated by Brexit. This is a man, remember, who rarely intervened in contemporary politics until very recently, but in the last few minutes he's expressed in his strongest terms yet his preference for a second referendum on the final Brexit deal. He has said that when people voted in 2016, the case for Brexit was a fantasy case, and that people should be able to vote on fact, not fantasy. Now, this is hardly the ideal preparation for the Conservative Party conference. It's not the build-up to it that Theresa May would have wanted. Here you have a former Tory Prime Minister wanting to derail Brexit from one flank of the party. You have the former Foreign Secretary this morning, as you explained, attacking her Brexit plan from the opposite flank of the party. 4,500 words, in fact, Boris Johnson wrote in the Telegraph this morning, but we spoke to people in Jarrow, just down the road. Nobody we spoke to, in fact, had read a single word of that plan, but they had some pretty forthright views on it nonetheless. Do you think he's got a better plan for Brexit than Theresa May?
Yes.
Why?
Because Theresa May is not the best Prime Minister to have.
No.
Why not?
Because it's one silly man's opinion.
Do you reckon he'd do a better job than Theresa May?
I think my dog could probably do a better job than Theresa May.
And Boris Johnson would do a better job than your dog?
I don't know about that, like.
You think Boris Johnson has the answers?
Potentially. I think we need to explore all the options.
What do you reckon?
I just think he's out for what he can do for himself, and to be totally honest, I think he's an absolute idiot.
Now, John Major also had some strong words tonight, without naming names, for people within the Conservative Party, he said, were behaving in a distasteful way, whose behaviour, he said, was distasteful. He said a group of MPs were behaving as if a party within a party. Now, it's no surprise that and it's no secret that the European Research Group, the Jacob Rees-Mogg wing of the party, if you like, have been independently making the case for Brexit and applying pressure on the Prime Minister. These words from John Major were something of a slapdown for them as he spoke to the audience here and again expressed his preference for a second Brexit referendum.
Disagrees with the Prime Minister, and it's perfectly entitled to do that, but it disagrees with it. It has its own members, it has its own meetings, it has its own WhatsApp, it has its own research, it has its own whips, and it collectively produces criticism, including from some of them, but not all of them. And there's regular suggestion that there are 48 people with their pen poised over a request for a leadership election within the Conservative Party. And I think that goes much further than anyone should. It all is, to all intents and purposes, a party within a party. It's a curious proposition to say it is undemocratic to ask the people what their views are. That seems to me to be rather odd. The position has changed since we had the referendum. We had the referendum in 2016, and people voted based on what they were told at the time. In many ways, forgive me if this is controversial, but the case that was made for Brexit was a fantasy case.
And John Major's been speaking tonight in conversation with David Miliband, both men advocates of a referendum on the final Brexit deal. It's no coincidence that this is happening on the eve of the Conservative Party conference. They want that part of the conversation in the Conservative Party conference, as indeed it was at the Labour conference. And neither was Boris Johnson's intervention this morning an accident of timing. As the Conservatives are gathering in Birmingham, the fractures, the civil war, if you like, as some might say, within the Conservative Party is boiling over and it hasn't even started yet.
Kieran Jenkins, thank you. Well, as Boris Johnson did his round of interviews to unveil his Brexit plan, he turned down a request from this programme to discuss it. So I tracked down his bike and waited by it until he came out. Boris! Hello, Mr Johnson. Could we have a word about your Brexit plan, please?
Hi, Chris.
Could we have a little word about your Brexit plan? A lot of people think it would put the Northern Ireland peace process at risk. Do you think it would?
Hang on a sec. Chris.
Could you give us a word? Because you
Yes,
could have
hi,
excluded us, yes.
No, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Listen, Christian. Here, can I give you this? Which is...
Yeah, I've read it. I'd like to ask a few questions about it.
Why don't you read it?
I have read it. I've read it, and I'd like to ask you some questions. Do you think the Northern Ireland peace process would be at risk because you do risk a hard border here?
No, I think on the contrary, this is the way to avoid any kind of border at all, and that's what both sides want to do. So,
why do you think Europe would accept it as an idea?
Well, because if you remember, it was actually what originally they were expecting from us, and it's actually what the Prime Minister outlined to begin with in her language.
But they wanted us to put the border in the Irish Sea, not this.
Which is completely wrong. If you don't, I think your best bet, Christian,
I've read it.
is to read it to your viewers.
I've read it.
It may take half an hour. They would love it.
Nobody thinks it's a realistic plan because they don't think Ireland would accept it.
The EU does.
Don't run away. We want to ask you some serious questions because you've just done a load of interviews. Why don't you talk to Channel 4 and answer a couple of questions?
You can't.
This is absurd. You want to have a serious conversation about Brexit and then you ride off without talking to us.
I want you to take the trouble to...
We have read it, Boris. We want to ask you some questions. Why can't you answer any serious questions? Well, I then spoke to another former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, who's at that meeting in South Shields that Kieran was reporting from, his constituency, when he was a Labour MP. And I began by asking him if it is, in fact, Boris Johnson who speaks for the people in Britain today.
Well, Boris Johnson's article seems to me to be about a new dividing line in the Conservative Party to advance his own political ambitions rather than a plan that can unite the country. And when it comes to his proposals in respect of Ireland, it's frankly dangerous to have someone of such seniority playing so fast and loose with one of the great achievements of the last 20 or 30 years of British politics, which is peace on the island of Ireland.
Well, I put that to him earlier today, and he said, no, there's going to be no hard border, there's no need for it, it'll all be fine.
But that is in defiance of every single person on the side of the Republic of Ireland, but also in the European Union. The European Union is clear that when the UK leaves the European Union, we become a so-called third country, and we have to ensure that there are the appropriate customs and other checks that exist. Why is that? Because of the decision that Theresa May took to lock herself in with the, frankly, extremists of the Conservative Party who said that the customs union and the single market were anathema.
But, I mean, people where you are voted to leave the European Union. Isn't it the case that they voted to not be, beholden to European rules, not obey the European court, do all the things that Boris Johnson is saying?
No, they voted for £350 million a week to come to the National Health Service. They voted for frictionless trade with the European Union. They voted for trade deals the day after we left the European Union. All the promises that were made and have shown not to be true.
You're there today with a former Conservative Prime Minister, John Major. I mean, isn't that a gift to all the Corbynistas who'll say, well, there's David Miliband hanging out with his Tory mates?
No, I think that it's only a gift to see Labour and Conservative members or supporters talking to each other if you believe that party tribes should only speak to their own kind. I invited John Major to South Shields. a Labour town, I'm a former Labour MP, to a civic event, because I think it's essential that we break out of, on this issue, we break out of the party tribes. And I think it's a huge credit to John Major that he said, I want to come to a Leave voting area, I want to come to a Labour town, and I want to break out of the boundaries of politics that have been so damaging on this European issue.
It's interesting to hear you talking about breaking out of traditional party lines. A lot of people think you might be coming back to start a new movement here, maybe a new third party. Is that in your mind?
I'm talking about the Brexit issue. Brexit is an issue that goes beyond a party. On this issue, we've got to do what the country needs. And frankly, if Theresa May 2 years ago had reached out across party lines, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in today. Shouting louder at each other or at the European Union is not going to help make progress. The only way out of this now, and the meetings I had this week were really worrying about the catastrophic threat of no deal. The only way out of this is to say that the people need to have their say.
Yeah, I mean, you attacked the Labour leadership last week over their Brexit positions. You know, a lot of people who support Jeremy Corbyn, they say, well, that David Miliband, he lives in New York. What's it got to do with him? Either come back here and stand or go back to your penthouse.
Well, first of all, I don't live in a penthouse. And secondly, I'm a British citizen. And I am using my voice as a British citizen because I care about the future of the country. We now face as a country the most serious, not just economic crisis, but political crisis of the last 75 years. And unless we take the issue with the seriousness it deserves, we're going to imperil our prosperity and, frankly, our global influence for many years to come.
David Miliband.